no single swatch tells you very much, but it's when you see a collection of positive and a collection of negative side by side that you really see what patterns people want to see for this concept, for this brand, for this idea, and what they don't.
I'm Sydney, the Insight Specialist at Constellations, and I'm here speaking with Joseph Fioramonti, who is the founder of Constellations. We've recently ran our first perception test, which asked the question, what does visual data look like? And we're here to unpack that today.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Um, so I guess my first question is, when people hear visual data, what do they think it means, and what did this test reveal instead?
Yeah, so that's the question. We weren't sure. I wasn't sure, and I thought it'd be a really interesting first public test for this tool that's designed to generate visual data. Right? We talk about visual data. We kind of use that interchangeably with the idea of data visualization, right? And you talked about it in the video that you made, and it's in the report that, me personally, and I feel probably a lot of other people feel like it's graphs and it's charts and it's probably pretty tech forward looking and kind of sleek. And those are my assumptions, but having used this tool for rebrands for years now, I'm always shocked by what we find out. It's rarely what I assume. So wanted to start there. And so when I put the test together, I searched for the terms that I thought were going to be typical, a lot of charts and kind of infographic-y looking stuff. But wanted to mix it up, put a few more traditional print media items in there, some things that surprised me, I guess like a data tree and things like that. So trying to mix it up and put a fair range of items to really to ask that question, what does that visual data look like? If you have data about visuals, what would people expect to see? Um, and so yeah, that was kind of the initial thought behind this particular test and why we wanted to start with this one.
In the video, I touch on the difference between visual data and data visualization.
Mhm.
Why do you think it's important to understand the difference between those two terms? And can you speak on the difference between those two terms?
Yeah, so for me and for us at Constellations, it was important to us because this is a new tool to get to visual data, and we didn't know what that looked like. We didn't know what people thought that was, and this was, a great use case for us to use the tool to understand the tool. And it's a small data set. We're just getting started. Being a professor at a college, I had access to students, and I could ask them to take these tests and get feedback from young people, which was great. These were designers, and so, I think initially this tool is probably best suited for designers and creative directors and people in those kinds of roles. Although the exciting part is, not to go off on too much of a tangent, I think there's a lot of application and everybody I talk to in a different field about it. It's really exciting to hear what they think they can do with it and want to do with it. So that's cool. But I invented the thing and came up with the idea for graphic design work, for branding work. So it made sense to start with those students and to kind of tailor some of the features for people who do that kind of work. And we wanted to know, what does visual data look like? Things we didn't expect that came out of it were the results. Like what we saw as far as patterns go that this group of 50 respondents said look like visual data. There were a lot of surprising things. I'm sure we'll talk about those, but um, the patterns and the insights we gained from it were really helpful for some of my client work that I'm doing with branding work. And seeing how people really associated small copy, particularly small structured copy, the kinds of tables of data you would see on a nutritional label, or some kind of a shipping report or something like that. Things that looked like you would never read them unless you had a real interest in, what's the sugar content of this drink or something like that. Seeing that people associated that with quote unquote visual data was really interesting, and it's shaping some of the branding work that I'm doing right now. So that's the type of insight that this tool provides, and that I've seen time and time again doing it with clients professionally. Closed door studies that we're doing for brands that I can't share publicly, but this was a great one to start with, and that was a good takeaway that I think is broadly usable by anybody who's doing this kind of work.
I feel like this goes a little bit more into the results, which we can touch on later.
Yep.
But I feel like design has been moving in like a clean direction. Everybody wants things to be like minimalistic and clean and simple, but I feel like this is almost kind of the opposite, where like people do want to see that little type. So where do you think that like takes design going forward? Do you think it's specific to like if you're into more nutrition or tech or something where you would need that fine print, or do you think this applies to a lot of design in general?
It probably depends a lot on context. And this is in some ways a really broad study in terms of asking a big question of, 50 people, very small study. So a small study in that regard. What the tool is really good at is if you have a creative initiative, you can put together ideas that you think will work, and then you get to test them in that context. So when we're talking about design more broadly, just design in general, I think we live in a time and an age where it's virtually impossible to speak about trends on a global level like that. 100 years ago, not the case. You saw these movements and these popular styles, and they were driven by the technology of the day, different printing techniques, things like that. But today, you can make anything look like literally anything, and so you need to think about it in terms of smaller groups and semiospheres or niche markets, things that are smaller. Um, so I don't know if it gives you broad insight necessarily on what people want to see. I think there was a broad insight with the small type and the grids and this metadata kind of appearance and aesthetic that is broader. And we wouldn't have seen that. I wouldn't have seen that without doing this study. It made me appreciate how there is so much small type that is legally required on things like food, drugs, manuals, and that we as a society we may or may not be the person who reads that stuff, but if you take it away, it's very apparently missing. And so I think that is a broad takeaway. And so for advertising design, for, I don't know, a sneaker or something like that, it may or may not lend credibility to the product. It really probably depends on the context. And it would be interesting to work with a brand and to do a study on their specific audience. How do they feel about it? If the value proposition is you're going to run faster and perform better as an athlete, I would imagine that's the kind of data that looks like this is science and this is medically validated in some way, and it would actually boost confidence in that product. Whereas if it's an outdoor nature shoe or something like that, that you get more in touch with the earth and it's a different value proposition that has less to do with science and data, it might hinder that in some way. So it really depends on context, but it did give us an insight on this aspect of just modern life where we're used to labels and they do just subconsciously make us feel like this is trustworthy.
So for this test, we sent it out to 50 emerging designers, college students.
Mhm.
Do you think that if we sent it out to a different group of people, that the results would have been different?
Yeah, it's very possible. I think the selection of swatches that we used in the constellations were in the audience perception maps were kind of general. My suspicion, and again, I've had suspicions with every one of these that I've done, and I've always been somewhat surprised, at least in some aspect of the result. I have a feeling with this one, if it was a broader test, the results would be pretty similar. Just the nature of the question is big picture, and the swatches themselves were kind of broad in general. So my suspicion is, without having run the test, I'm always hesitant to say what the results will be before we run a test. But my suspicion is that they would be very, very similar in this case. There are other things that we've tested that we're going to release later with the same audience, a similar audience that I think would be quite different on a big scale. So just as an example, I ran a test with my students, about the same kind of numbers. We sent it this one too, the visual data one. We sent it to 100 people. We had 50 back, which is good results. We asked one, what does spirituality look like? And I have a feeling based on age, location, probably financial demographics, things like that, you'll get pretty different results based on the audience. And that's interesting to me as well. And I would love to work with a firm who has those segmented populations in a way that we can kind of see what does this particular thing look like to different groups of people that we've segmented out based on these parameters.
This is kind of about constellations in general,
Mhm.
but I feel like the tool as a whole, when people are thinking about it, you need to make sure, or the people who are using the tool, you want to make sure that you're sending it to the correct audience to
Yeah.
get that certain feedback. I know some speculations are like the images that you put might not be what everybody else thinks, but that's the point. I guess for designers, like we are designers first. You're putting these ideas because you know in some way that it's going to work, or this is what you're expecting
Mhm.
for to work out. And then you send that out and get results on that. So it is like curated by you, and it's already has your opinion to it. Do you think, I don't know where I'm going with that, but like,
That it's a problem for the tool.
yeah, not
Designer,
necessarily a
scout.
problem, but people
Yeah.
might say like you're the one curating the images, so
Yes.
like obviously you have a say, so it can't be general. Like, what is your, how would you express like your take on that? Or
Yeah, absolutely. And even there are a million holes to poke in this visual data study that we're talking about, right? The audience selection, how are the images curated? But these are the same challenges that any survey is going to have, whether it's text-based or these new visual audience perception maps. I mean, it's always going to have those constraints, those limitations, those blind spots, right? And so that's why again I say like if you're trying to figure out what everybody thinks about something, it's very rare you're going to be able to get to that on a real global level like we're talking about. But what I have found it's tremendously powerful for with the design work that I do with my company Dark Square is we use it and it was really created to do rebrand work. And so rather than working with a CEO or a board who's working on a company rebrand or whatever that group of people is and asking, showing them a mood board by contrast and saying, what colors do you like? That's useful, right? You want them to be happy with the way that it looks, but it's not exactly scientific if you're thinking about well, we want audiences to react a certain way. Like we just know that the CEO or the board, whoever's looking at that mood board, that's how they react. We really don't know how their customers react, how their employees react, or whatever. And so I kind of came up with this idea and worked with my partners on this and our developers, and we built kind of a proof of concept of it that we've been using for a very long time. And so we'll do the mood board. We'll check it with the stakeholders on the project, and then we'll take that mood board and turn it into an audience perception map or three maps, and we will send that to customers of theirs. We will send it to the entire company and ask them to respond. And employees are a great base for a rebrand to ask, what does the brand look like? And that's how we'll frame it. We'll say, you work here 40 hours a week, you've been here 10 years or whatever it is, you're very familiar with the brand. Which images do you most associate with your company's brand and which images do you least associate? And so we take that data and we go back to the stakeholders on the project and we're able to show them very, very clearly this is what people are associating with your company. And we can segment it out. We can say this is what employees see, this is what your customers responded with, and we can contrast those and see where there's agreement and alignment on those things. But it's such a powerful tool to really show those stakeholders this is not opinion. There's science under the hood here. There's statistical data, and we have a way to get to it now. And that's what I feel like, again, that's what I used it for, and that's what I continue to use it for, and what I created it for. I think there's a lot broader application. I've had some conversations with people who are more in a political arena, and we're talking about ways to take photos of candidates who are running for office at the state or even federal level and show people in different outfits, show people in different settings, and ask their audience, and they have big audiences that they can send this to and say, which photos convey a sense of trust or whatever it is they're trying to analyze and personify, and then get those back and really have a clear view on what should this candidate be wearing, what settings should we be doing photo ops in, that kind of stuff. So there's broad application, and what it works well for is we know the setting, we kind of know who the audience is. We have customers and employees, or we have voters, or campaign members, or whatever it is. And we're able to say, we're trying to say this thing. There's a number of ways that we could go about it and we want to really narrow it down to the right one. And that's what this tool is excellent for.
yeah, it's really awesome to hear like the broader applications for it. Obviously, it was first made for designers, but it'll be exciting to see what people are going to use it for in the future because really it just is a surveying tool that many different genres of jobs and demographics of people can use for different things. Going back to, I guess, more designers, because that's what it was originally created for. Can you talk a little bit about the mood boarding process for people who might not know what that is and like why creating mood boards is so crucial in the design process?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I teach design. I also own Dark Square, and we do design work for, fairly large technology companies, B2B enterprise software. So it's pretty niche. It's not B2C, so it's typically not the flashy stuff that wins a lot of design awards. It's a little more button up, a little more conservative than that. So mood boards are fantastic. I learned about them when I went to SCAD as a grad student. I'd never really used them before, and they were a game changer because it is a fantastic tool where when you're working with clients, You're not asking them what color do you want it to be, what do you want it to look like. My first experience was doing work for the Department of Homeland Security, and they were telling us things like we want it to be patriotic, and we also like this green because it looks like the computers that we used to use back in the day. But I had to guess what that meant to those people. I had a vague idea based on the language that they used. But what saved that project was doing a mood board, and when they pointed to a green, I didn't have to guess anymore. Is it a lime green, a Kelly green, a mint green? So it's this fantastic tool for talking with people about what they would like to see. The shortcomings of a mood board is that it's really A to B. I'm talking to one pe person or maybe two or three people on a Zoom call. Um, I don't call these mood boards because I think they're fundamentally different. These are audience perception maps. It is a quick tool that I can send to 20,000 people if I have that mailing list, or I can post on social media. And it's very easy for anybody who has never seen it before to look at and understand what's the objective. And it takes 2, 3 minutes tops. It's super easy. And so it is a way to just remove all the barriers to entry that a typical mood board takes. We have to explain what it is, we have to talk through it. Typically there's one or two people in the room who are very talkative, and then everybody else is kind of quiet. So there's all these dynamics that get in the way of really getting to the heart of what visuals convey the meaning we're trying to convey. And we're able to hear from thousands and thousands of people and see where they align. And that's what makes this so different and so powerful.
Awesome. I want to segue a little bit more into the results of this specific test.
Mhm.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what were the major patterns that emerged from this test?
Yeah, let's take a look at it. I'll pull up the results screen right here so everybody can see what this looks like. So just a quick tour of the results here. We did 3 APMs. And again, these were all swatches that I selected based on certain assumptions, right? I was looking at infographics. I searched terms like visual data, information design, kind of techie stuff came back for the most part, but I did want to mix it up. And so you see some print stuff in here. And if you hover over any given swatch, you can see the breakdown of the positive and negative ratios in terms of percentage and actual numbers. And this is really helpful at a glance. Some surprising things. These are data trees, I believe. This is definitely a data tree down here or up here rather. And you can see it's predominantly red at 68% negative. This is what data people would look at, but the general audience that we surveyed, they didn't associate that with this idea of visual data, even though that's exactly what it is. And then we have this more print media looking thing. There's these boxes and little postmark stamp looking things in different boxes with small type. This did pretty well at 78%, a little more than 78%. And there's a wider range of different charts and graphs. I have no idea what this thing right here is, but it looks super techy to me. I thought for sure that one in particular just stood out to me as something that people would have responded positively to. And so this is super helpful. If I was doing a rebrand, I could go into a board, I can talk to stakeholders about the project and really clearly say, like, here are some winners, here are some things we want to avoid if we're trying to communicate that your brand is about visual data, just as an example. Certain things weren't a surprise, right? Like this is a more traditional print-based media. There's a lot of texture to it. There's not a lot of text on it. It looks kind of artsy. Same with this. It's 70% negative and 80% negative. Those were not surprises. So there's certain assumptions that we had that made sense. This one right here I thought looked pretty techy, and that one came in at 85% negative. So these are helpful, but the real powerhouse of the tool is the section we call constellations. So we call these audience perception maps. We get back these heat maps, but what we can do is out of those 3 boards or 2 boards or 10 boards, however many we do, we are able to compile the positive, the negative, the neutral. So these are set at a 60% threshold. So they had to score a 60 or higher on the positive side to be listed in the results here. And then we can also segment out the negative. And this is where we really start to see the patterns. And then the neutral, there weren't too many middle ground ones, which was kind of interesting. So I know in the article we looked at 70%. So I'm going to kick this up to 70% threshold. So it had to score 70 or better. And that's where we start to see it's hard to see here, but there's small copy within this and little pixelated things about lines. There's lots of small data around these glasses. I think this was a Nike ad or something like that that we cropped in on. some kind of diagram, very artistic, a little dramatic, but again, lots of little diagrams, boxes and type, some typical things that we expected, pie charts, some kind of closed loop on a percentage, again, small type. But these ones, the print ones with the small type, these cell diagrams or whatever this is, and the small type with numbers and letters that are not necessarily easily readable, those were the things that stood out as really interesting and, consistent. This one's a little bit of an outlier. It could be Braille or something like that. I don't know. It still looks like labels and diagrams to me to some extent. But by contrast, the photographic ones, the traditional print ones, those were not a surprise. Um, what was a surprise were some of these techie ones. It wasn't this variable that I had assumed was going to be the variable, that it was really sleek and kind of tech forward or print. That wasn't the defining factor. It was that these really don't have a lot of that small type stuff. This one does. So it is an outlier. I could be wrong, but I think overwhelmingly those are the elements that I see these patterns emerge where things that people associated with visual data, it had that kind of stuff, and things people didn't, they don't have that stuff.
So the tech forward designs rated more poorly. Um,
Not necessarily. Some of them rated positive, some of them rated negative, right? There is a mix here, which tells me that wasn't the determining factor, which was my assumption when I made the test. I thought those would be the things that people ranked as quote unquote visual data, but it wasn't. It seems to be a non-factor in how people perceive this idea of visual data. And that was the surprise.
right. And we talked about labeling and structure. So it wasn't necessarily the fact that these swatches were tech forward designs, but it was the fact that there was labeling on top of that tech design that really made the difference here.
Yeah. So whether it was a little bit more digital and technological looking or more traditional analog or print based, didn't matter. It was, did it have these boxes with small print on it? That seems to be the variable. That seems to be the pattern that people responded. Yeah, that's what visual data looks like. It has this stuff in it. We can turn this way up. Let's see. What does 90% look like? We can get into, these are more diagrammy looking than the others, so that might be a consideration. And that's the real power of this tool is as a creative, when I'm doing this work, I can get a feel for, what's the risk tolerance of my stakeholders. Do they want to narrow it down to like it needs to look like this? We need to know what 90+% of people want to see. Or do they want to give themselves a little bit of creative freedom and open it up a little bit. I typically find for the branding work that Dark Square does that 70% is a good number, and they usually feel pretty good about that. And it's the contrast that is powerful. I will download these and put them into a presentation and show them side by side, and no single swatch tells you very much, but it's when you see a collection of positive and a collection of negative side by side that you really see what patterns people want to see for this concept, for this brand, for this idea, and what they don't.
So based on these results and like looking at it as a whole, what do you think this tells us about how people feel about data and not just how they interpret it?
Yeah, so that's where it opens up to interpretation a little bit, and to be honest, I'm speculating, but I do feel like there's powerful insights here, and there's conclusions that can be drawn from this. We could run more tests and change out some of these swatches or retest the things that tested positive to maybe solidify these answers a little bit. But the pattern that I see, the thing that it made me think of again is going back to those labels, that small type, the information that most people don't read. Uh, when you take it out of those settings, it would be, I think, jarring. Like if I went into a truck stop on a road trip and I bought a bunch of sodas and snacks for the kids or something like that, and that stuff wasn't on the back of the package, I'd be very concerned. I probably wouldn't eat it or share it with anybody. And so that's what it made me think of. That's kind of my context for this and the big takeaway that I had, that this lends a certain amount of credibility, that it doesn't have to be super informative. Most people are probably not going to read it at this scale, but having it there gives this appearance of authority or an appearance of being vetted by some organization or government institution that says, yes, this is okay, this passed our test. And so that's what it made me think of, and that's my big takeaway. And I've been using that, as I mentioned, with some work I'm doing for clients, and it's proven valuable. I think it's going to turn out to be um, really a powerful small element to add to some of the work that we do.
Yeah, and that's like your biggest takeaway. Is that also what you hope that other people take away from this study?
Maybe there might be contexts that other people see for the work that they do, right? It's going to be specific to them. I do think that is a broad one that can be taken away from this. I mean, this would be very easy to challenge if somebody had a different opinion, a different interpretation of these results. Um, Depending on the context, they could probably see something a little bit different or significantly different. My suspicion, though, is that's probably right, and that is for me the biggest takeaway. And we could absolutely run more tests to confirm this, and to confirm it in different contexts with different audiences, around different products, things like that. We could get really granular with this if we had the audiences to test it with.
This is going a little bit more broad about constellations as a whole, but talking about like retesting and testing with more audiences. Um, I guess like from this test, how do you think this whole process ties back to what Constellations is trying to change about design research?
For me, the more I do this, and we've been using it professionally with, fairly big clients and large rebrand projects. It's due diligence. For me, this is design due diligence. Um, we've had a lot of success before we came up with this idea and this tool and we started using it, but it always felt more like an art than a science. And I think a lot of designers are comfortable there, and I was for sure. Um, I think, part of it, and it's such a simple idea. It really shocks me. Nobody else has ever done this, but I was doing a lot of work with big data companies and big marketing data companies, and it was like, why isn't there any data for design like this? And so it just seemed like an obvious idea to me. And now I will not do a project without going through this exercise with a company. If a company wants to hire us based on a style or something like that, I have to decline because I feel like it is my responsibility to go through this process. It is my due diligence to make sure that the answer that I give my client is the right answer. And I'm always surprised by the results, and I'm always delighted with the final design outcome. So when I get the tests back, when I get the constellations back, and I review it with the stakeholders in my team, that's where all the ideas come from. At this point, try to discourage my team from having a lot of ideas about what the final product should look like until we go through this, um, because I've just seen so many times that our assumptions were off to one degree or another. And when we get these back, we know it's right. And then we do the typical testing that any firm does after something goes live, and we're real happy with the outcome.
And it's obviously like design is about opinion, but with this, it's turning that opinion into actual data that you can use. Like objectively, yes, design is opinion, but that opinion can also be almost like fact, which people can like put their trust into, which I think would definitely
Right.
help with clients being confident that like, okay, this is the direction we're going to go in because we see that this is what people want versus just saying like, we think that this is going to work.
Exactly. So if I ask you, do you like this design? It's an opinion. If somebody asks me if I like this design, it's a matter of opinion. If we're able to ask 5 or 10,000 people, do you like this design? I think it's much closer to fact than opinion at that point. If we have alignment with our audience and we want to connect with them about what they believe, what they think about a product or whatever it is, and we know that the majority of people, 90%, 85%, respond positively to these certain swatches within our APMs, it's not an opinion anymore. It's a fact. If we show these kinds of visuals, they're going to respond the way that we want them to.
Absolutely. And again, like it's not talking about everybody, it's not a whole generalization. It's picking those specific target audiences so you know that it's going to resonate with the people that you want it to resonate with, which is really important.
Right. Yes. For the branding stuff, it's actually pretty easy to find the audience because those companies have those audiences. We can poll their social media followers. We can send this to their mailing lists and get client and customer feedback. And if nothing else, we can send out a memo from the boss, ask the CEO or whoever's in charge to send this to all the employees and get 1,000 or so people to respond. And those are the people who work at the brand day in and day out that know it intimately and are familiar with it. And we can get real feedback that we can base our decisions on.
Yeah. And that also like bypasses those people who might be scared to speak up or because people can put their true opinions and thoughts into these results because it's easy. You just drag and drop the dots on what you think. So.
Yeah, it's super easy. And we've seen other benefits in addition to getting this great feedback and great direction from our audience about what they want to see. With rebrands in particular in B2B settings, historically, rebrands are disruptive. Like we have found that people get nervous, like what's going on. Very often there's like an acquisition that's going on, like all this political stuff behind the background. And employees, people who work at the company, even leaders and partners and things like that, get a little nervous because it's a big disruptive change, especially if you're changing the name, the logo, these things that people are very personal about. You think about brand loyalty for somebody like Nike, like they can't change their logo, right? It's so disruptive. They would lose so much market share. They have to be very calculated about that. We've been able to use this tool to help brands be more calculated. B2B companies that aren't nearly as cognizant about that disruption as somebody like Nike would be, for example. And what we have found is by simply sending this to all the employees at the company, they feel like they're heard. They have a chance to actually voice their opinion instead of getting drowned out by that handful of people who's really just talkative. They're not trying to drown anybody out. It's just the nature of that kind of a conversation. But everybody from the CEO to, you know, just housekeeping and things like that, everybody gets a say. We get to hear that collectively. And we found that these exercises really boost morale at the company, that people feel included. They're excited about the rebrand instead of nervous about it. We've just seen much better results on that human emotional side, on the employee side too, which has been a nice benefit.
So, kind of just to wrap up this call here and this interview with you, I just wanted to ask what's coming next? Like, what are the follow-up studies that you're going to do? Do you think that this will be a series, or just what are you excited to test in the future?
So much. This is the thing I'm probably most excited about with the tool is just to ask these questions. I've been a college professor for over 15 years now, and so I have a lot of colleagues who just do fascinating work and have interesting ideas on how to use this tool. I also just have a lot of friends in advertising, marketing, design, and just other people who are influencers or whatnot who have interesting audiences built around interesting ideas that I'm so excited to collaborate with, that we can work together to make a constellation and to put it in front of their audiences. And if anybody watching this has an idea, please reach out to us on our website. We would love to, collaborate with anybody who has a good idea and an interesting audience to test something with. So that's what I'm most excited about. And we have a bunch lined up. One of our partners is an AI expert and doing really interesting research in that area. And I have a discussion with him about some of the things we might want to test with his audience around AI. One of them being kind of the simple one: can people distinguish between AI generated images and actual photography? I think at this stage, most people know it's pretty hard to distinguish, but we will have a test to actually prove it now. Um, there's just so many ones that we have planned, and so definitely sign up for the mailing list. We're gonna try to get to a place where we can do this maybe once a week or once every other week. So that's what I'm really excited about, and it's been great to collaborate with you. And I know you're working on some really interesting ideas to test with the tool as well.
Yeah, one of the ideas that I'm excited about would be to work with a feminist theory scholar to find the difference between what feminine looks like and what girly looks like. So, getting their opinion on which images we can curate to make those audience perception maps, the APMs, and then send those out, get the results, and then actually speak with them to interpret what those results look like and what they mean. I think that would be really exciting. But we have so many ideas that we're excited to test. So, I'm
But
just
that's a great example of how this tool can get to those nuanced differences. And I just love that feminine versus girly, right? They seem like interchangeable words, but there's probably a perceptual difference there with the general audience that would be really fascinating to work with a scholar on. So I'm excited about that one as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about the platform as a whole and the results of our first APM. So
Thanks
thank
for
you.
talking with me.